thing. Yeah, he was friends with her roommate, but they didn't know each other, and he lived in the dorm next to us. It's all very strange. But anyway, here you go. Todd.
Thank you, Bruce. Alrighty, so, okay. And don't forget, you can also purchase DVDs of the talks here from Ted, who does a wonderful job for us in recruiting this stuff. Well, so there you go. And without further ado, Michael Ossman will be talking to you about Bluetooth keyboards. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Todd. Can you guys hear me? Excellent. I can hear you too, some of you. It's really a pleasure to be here for ShmooCon VI. Suck it, Emacs. I'm Mike, and I work at the Institute for Telecommunication Sciences at the United States Department of Commerce Boulder Labs in Colorado. And ITS was really cool, and they sent me here. And we do telecommunication research and engineering services for various government agencies. But this work that I'm presenting today is my own. If I say something stupid, when I say something stupid, don't blame the government. I'm here to talk about Bluetooth keyboards, and in particular, devices that follow the Bluetooth HID profile, the Human Interface Device Profile. That was published in 2003. And I'm talking about devices that are following the Bluetooth core specification version 1.2. That might sound a little old to you. Some of you may have heard a few weeks ago that Bluetooth 4.0 was released. But the reason I'm looking at 1.2 is because that's what keyboards use. Keyboards don't use Bluetooth Low Energy that was specified in 4.0. They don't use alternative MAC-PHY 802.11 that was in 3.0. They don't use Simple Secure Pairing that was in 2.1. They don't use Enhanced Data Rate that was 2.0. You have to go back to version 1.2 to find new features of Bluetooth that are actually used by Bluetooth keyboards that are on the market. Incidentally, something else that was published in 2003 is a particular article in an issue of Cryptogram. I'm sure you guys have all heard of Cryptogram, that newsletter that's written by the other Bruce. In 2003, he wrote a little short article on the importance of authentication. And it was kind of saying, basically, encryption's great and all, but if you don't verify who's on the other end of the line, it's kind of pointless, right? So I want to read you a little excerpt. Oh, and it would be nice if I had this out and ready for you, wouldn't it? From this February 2003 issue. Last year, I had a conversation with an engineer involved with security for the Bluetooth wireless protocol. I told him that Bluetooth has only privacy and not per-packet authentication. He responded with the prototypical lame responses. 1, pseudo-random frequency hopping makes it nearly impossible for an attacker to get in. And 2, the range is only 8 feet, so the attacks are naturally limited. I tried to argue the point, but eventually gave up. Then I said something like, I can hardly wait for Bluetooth to become universal because I really want a wireless keyboard and mouse with a base station built into my computer. He said, yes, but you really probably don't want to use Bluetooth for that because then somebody could stuff keystrokes or mouse clicks into your system. Is it really that bad? Can anybody in the parking lot sniff your keystrokes, stuff keystrokes into your PC? The answer is a little bit complicated, and that's why I'm here today. Bluetooth keyboards are generally battery powered, and most of them have a power switch. I have seen keyboards that don't have a power switch. I've seen a keyboard that has a power button for a PC, but doesn't actually have a switch to turn itself off and on. Bluetooth keyboards, most of them have a connect button that puts the keyboard into discoverable mode and allows a host to connect to it and initiate that communication. Bluetooth keyboards generally have some kind of indicator, like an LED light, or sometimes even a whole LCD display. That tells you something about what it's doing. Usually, at the very least, they have some kind of indicator to tell you that they're in discoverable mode. Oftentimes, Bluetooth keyboards have their BD8EDR, the Bluetooth device address, printed somewhere on them or on a sticker or something like that, which is really convenient if you're trying to connect to these things. One particular interesting thing, the Bluetooth keyboards, most of them ship with a host adapter in the form of a dongle, USB dongle. And it's just the same as any other USB dongle you would buy, except that it also has that little connect button on it. And so the idea is you push the connect button on your keyboard, you put your connect button on your dongle, they find each other, and everything starts to work. And that process of connecting to each other is establishing what's called a virtual cable. But realize that virtual cabling is different than pairing. You might be familiar with pairing from other Bluetooth devices that you've used, where it uses some kind of a pin. And the result of pairing is a link key, which is a shared secret between the two devices that can then be used for authentication and encryption down the road. Many times when you virtually cable to HID devices, or a device in a host, many times you are pairing and virtually cabling at the same time, but not necessarily. The virtual cable concept is that your keyboard is plugged into a computer, a one-to-one correspondence. It's only plugged into one at a time is the idea, right? Just like it would be if you plugged it in with a cable. But it's a different construct than pairing. The HID profile, the Bluetooth HID profile, basically it's pretty short. It's only about a 100-page specification compared to about 2,000 for the core specification for Bluetooth. And basically it says what we do is we take USB HID and run it over Bluetooth. So the USB guys have figured out this human interface device stuff. We're just going to take their protocol and run it on top of Bluetooth. And one thing that stood out to me in particular is that encryption support is required for keyboards. It says that right there in the Bluetooth HID profile. And it also says that encryption support is not required for a mouse or for most other HID devices. And keyboards only have to support encryption. They don't actually have to use it all the time. Nowhere in the specification does it say keystrokes shall be encrypted. The HID protocol is in the form of short frames called reports. And an HID report is carried in an L2 cap frame, which is one of the Bluetooth suite protocols. And that runs over HCI, the host controller interface between a host and a host adapter, like a dongle. And that same HID report carried in the same L2 cap frame is carried over the baseband, what's called the baseband interface, which is the air interface between a dongle and a device. So if we're wanting to explore these systems, we kind of have two different approaches or two different avenues that we can take. One is the HCI layer and the other is the baseband layer. And the tools that I'm going to be talking about today kind of fit into two categories. Some of them are HCI layer tools that are based on the BlueZ Linux Bluetooth stack. And the other are baseband tools using the GR Bluetooth project, GNU Radio, and the USRP from Edis Research. And as many of you know, I'm a developer on the GR Bluetooth project, so I've been doing a lot of work on that. But for this talk, I really have focused a lot on what can be done with off-the-shelf dongles and a $10 part and open source software on the left. I'm really interested in what can an attacker do with those really affordable tools, and I'm also really interested in what can a defender do with those very affordable tools. I mean, maybe you assume that your attacker has a USRP or even more sophisticated hardware, but if you're a defender and you're on a budget, wouldn't it be nice to be able to use the more affordable tools to assess your own systems and figure out where your weaknesses are? The HID protocol basically has two flavors. One's called boot protocol, and the other is report protocol. And this comes from the USB HID spec, okay, so for wired keyboards. The report protocol is the thing that all keyboards are required to support, and all HID devices are required to support. It's a very flexible protocol where the HID device provides some kind of a descriptor to the host that tells the host how to parse their messages. So it's a very flexible and complicated parser. So typically it's only implemented in a very full stack implementation on the host side. But when they were first coming up with HID for USB, they said, well, what about a BIOS of a PC? How are we going to boot up? Are we going to expect that BIOS vendors are going to have a complete USB stack? Probably not. So what they did was they came up with this boot protocol, which has these fixed reports, not flexible reports. And there are fixed reports defined for keyboards, simple keyboards and 2-axis mice, and that's it. Any variation on that requires report protocol. But boot protocol is a fixed reporting mechanism to be used, that is used between keyboards and a BIOS. It can be used by the operating system once you boot up, optionally. These are both defined in the HID specification with the idea that boot protocol is available for BIOSes to use. Bluetooth specifies something called boot mode, which is an extension of this idea. When you're in boot mode, when a device is in boot mode, or in particular when a dongle is in boot mode talking to a device, it's using the boot protocol to talk to the device, and it's also probably using USB emulation. So what it does is it tells the host computer, hey, I'm a USB keyboard. It doesn't tell it, I'm a Bluetooth adapter. It doesn't tell it anything about there being Bluetooth connected to the system. It's just saying, I'm a USB keyboard and a USB mouse, in the case of this one, because it's a little dongle that ships with both a keyboard and a mouse. It just basically fools the system, and that allows a boot time. A BIOS doesn't have to have any kind of knowledge of Bluetooth whatsoever. I'm going to show you just a real quick demo here. If I look at my USB bus, you'll see the devices I have on it. I'm going to pop in this little dongle that came with the keyboard and look at my bus again. And there you see those top 3 lines are the dongle. It's actually enumerated itself as 3 devices. It's enumerated itself as a keyboard, as a mouse, and as a dongle. And if I do an HCI config, you'll see I have no HCI Bluetooth devices at all. But if I use the HID to HCI utility that comes with BlueZ, I can switch the thing over to HCI mode, and then you can see, oh, now I have a Bluetooth device attached, right? So unless the user or the host operating system makes the effort to put the thing into HCI mode, it's always going to default to boot mode where it's doing USB emulation. And this happens a lot. You put the dongle into the computer, and let's say, for example, you put it into a computer that doesn't have a Bluetooth stack, or it has a Bluetooth stack, but it doesn't actually support the HID profile. And there's a very famous stack that doesn't support the HID profile, and that's the one that ships with Windows XP. So if you plug this thing into a Windows XP computer and you never install the third-party stack that probably came on a CD with your keyboard, then you're probably running this thing in boot mode all the time. So I was playing with this particular one last year as I was working on the GR Bluetooth project, and I captured a waveform of this keyboard, and here's a spectrogram of it. And then I was working on this Wireshark Bluetooth baseband plugin, which is now a part of the GR Bluetooth project. So it's this plugin for Wireshark that dissects baseband. And by the way, Dominic Spill, who is unable to be here today, did put out a new release of GR Bluetooth this morning. So some fresh codes out there for you all. The interesting thing I noted is this is actually the capture I was using when I was developing this, and I was going down through the packet one field at a time, and I'm getting closer and closer to this payload at the bottom, and I'm going, oh my goodness, there isn't very much entropy there. Realized that this was taken with a USRP and entirely passive monitoring, with no knowledge of the device's addresses, no knowledge of any link keys, just completely blind passive monitoring. And here I get to the bottom, and I have a completely clear text HID report. And this is a boot mode report And you can see in the middle of that string of mostly zeros, there's the character 1C, and that's the particular